Hey kids, Miss Cannon here, coming live from room 223. Finally got the new recording studio set up in the new office, so we are ready to read ELA Crunch number 3. This will definitely be in 2 videos because I can only do up to 15 minutes per video on YouTube. So make sure that you are listening to both of the recordings. I'm going to do one of the first reading and then one of the second reading, and then after the second reading will be the questions. So again, you're going to have to do the first reading, the second reading, and then the questions. Here we go. Our first reading passage, sorry about that, is An Unexpected Trip. Sarah wasn't quite sure what was going on. She had been sitting in the back of the car for hours as it rumbled up the Highway's 6 spotless lanes. There were not many other cars. When they turned off the main highway, Sarah wasn't very worried. This was the way to the house her parents had, far, far out in the country. She'd been before, for summers. Sometimes she got to bring her friend Sam. Going to the house by itself did not worry Sarah. The chains rattling around the back seat next to her, though, were a different story. Sarah's mom and dad had said not to worry and that everything was fine. If everything was fine, though, why had they gotten so upset when the phone had rung last night? This time of month, Sarah usually spent the night with her grandmother, watching old movies and eating popcorn that Grandma made on the stove in a pot, not in the microwave. It was delicious. She couldn't quite make out what her mom had been saying into the phone. Something like, "What do you mean you can't come, Mom? I need you. No, you don't understand. It has to be tomorrow night." Later, her mom and dad told her that Grandma wasn't coming and that she'd have to come on a little car ride with them. "Can I still have popcorn the way Grandma makes it?" Sarah had asked. Her parents had seemed nervous before, but when she asked this, they looked at each other and had a nice loud laugh, collapsing into a hug. "We'll see what we can do, Ladyface," her dad said, giving her a kiss on the cheek. Today her parents had woken her up very early in the morning. They told her they'd only be gone for a night, but let her pack as many toys and movies as she wanted. Sarah was a little confused. Normally one night meant 2 toys and 2 movies. Her mother was very strict about this, and Sarah had often gotten a stern talking to when her mother found an extra game or stuffed animal packed in between her sweaters. Today, however, there weren't any toy restrictions. There were no restrictions on soda, junk food, or TV watching. Her parents didn't seem to be paying much attention to her. They weren't doing much of anything, actually, except staring out the windows as the flat countryside rolled past. When they made it to the cottage, it seemed strange. It was fall, and what looked beautiful in the summertime looked odd and spooky now. The friendly green trees had lost their leaves and now had sharp-looking branches pointing in every direction. In summer, Sarah loved playing in the little barn-shaped garage. Today, Sarah couldn't tell what was hiding in its shadows. She hurried out as soon as the car engine shut off. True to their word, Sarah's parents made her popcorn as soon as they got to the house in the late afternoon. Her mom put one of her favorite movies on the TV, covered her in a blanket, and sat in the kitchen. Her father brought things into the house and then disappeared into the garage for a long time. She heard banging. She could not imagine what was going on. Eventually, she fell asleep. When she woke up, the sun was setting. Her mom sat in a chair across the room, looking her in the face. It was not usual for Sarah's mom to be there when she woke up, lovingly looking into her eyes. Tonight she seemed nervous. "Where's Dad?" Sarah asked, rubbing her eyes. Her mom looked down and twisted her fingers together. "Your dad? He has some things he has to do. Alone. We'll see him in the morning." Suddenly she stood up. "Sarah, it's time for bed." "Mom, it's not even dark out." "Sarah. And I'm not tired. I just woke up." "Don't argue with me," Sarah's mom yelled. She hardly ever yelled. Sarah was a little scared. Mom let out a deep sigh. "Sarah, honey, we should go to bed. It's been a long day. I'll lie down with you." They went to her room and read books together. Sarah was not tired. They talked and read for a long time. Eventually, Sarah's mom fell asleep. Sarah tossed and turned, burrowing her head into her mom or rolling far across the bed. She decided she needed to walk around a bit. Her legs were crampy, plus she had had an awful lot of soda to drink. She got up to walk to the bathroom. The bedroom door opened with a long, low creaking sound. All the lights in the house were off. Sarah could only see because of the big full moon shining through the windows. She put her hands on the wall, feeling her way forward, bumping into tables and tripping on shoes. Excuse me. Just as she got near the bathroom, she realized she could hear a sound. It was like a wailing, crying sound. It was like a dog that was hurt, but also somehow different. Mixed in with the howls and yelps were the sounds of the chains rattling. Sarah remembered that that sound, the one the chains next to... Let me reread that sentence, please. Sarah remembered that sound, the one the chains next to her in the car made every time it hit a bump in the road. What was going on? She realized the sound was coming from the garage, which connected to the house via a small door. As Sarah crept towards the door, the howling stopped. What was in there? It sounded hurt and afraid. Maybe Sarah could help it. She eased open the door, which made its own low creak, like a very old ghost waking up in the morning. At first, Sarah saw nothing. Then out of the darkness, a huge shape lunged at her. It was covered in wild, dark fur. It had a huge snout full of long, sharp teeth that snapped and trailed froth. It made the loudest sound Sarah had ever heard as it came at her. Then at the last minute, she heard the sound of change and the animal seemed to snap backwards. Sarah screamed as loud as she could. The thing came at her again and snapped backwards towards the wall a second time. Then a lot of things happened at once. Sarah heard her mom yell her name. She fell to the floor. Things started to go dark. Just before they did, Sarah noticed something very odd. The thing was wearing a torn-up pair of red pants. Just like my dad's, she thought as she drifted off. The next morning, Sarah was in bed. Birds chirped. Sun streamed through in the window. Had it all been a dream? Sarah stood up and went into the house. Everything looked normal. She smelled bacon and heard it sizzle and pop in the pan. She made her way to the kitchen where her mom was happily frying up eggs and bacon. The waffle maker was out too, sending steam up towards the ceiling. Her dad sat at the table sipping coffee. When he saw her come into the room, he put down the paper he was reading. He motioned for her to come over. Sarah hesitated a little and went over and sat. Her dad looked at her kindly. "Hey, Ladyface," he said. "Do you know what a werewolf is?" That is the end of our first reading. I actually still have about 8 minutes, so I'm going to try to get through the second one and see kind of like where we go at on time. So I may have just been kidding about there being 2 videos. So our second story is called The Run series number 1. Dennis and Mac had been driving for almost a week, and they hadn't seen a single soul. They were worried. When they'd left the ranch, they thought that maybe they'd run into someone, another survivor, but there was no one. The roads were almost empty to make better time. Mac wondered if they might not have better luck on the smaller country roads, but Dennis wouldn't have it. Those roads had curves and were thick with trees. There was no way of seeing danger coming. If someone wanted to spring a surprise on you, you wouldn't know it until it was too late. When the plague came, Dennis and Mac had been working as ranch hands on a cattle farm. Both had just finished their first year of college. Dennis went to school on the East Coast, Mac on the West. They found that they were very similar people. They both studied hard and read a lot of books, but they also both liked being outdoors. At the end of a good day, they came home smelling of sweat and dirt. They quickly became friends. The ranch was a small, family-run operation, but with only about 50 head of cattle. The family that ran it, the Griersons, would advertise in college newspapers in the spring. There were plenty of ranch hands in the area who needed work, but Bucky Grierson felt city kids could benefit from exposure to country life. Young men would apply, and then the Griersons would hire about half a dozen hands every spring to help them run cattle. It was tough work, but Dennis and Mac felt lucky to be picked. The farm didn't have a TV or the internet or a telephone. As a result, the first they heard of the plague was on the radio. Every night, the ranch hands liked to gather in the mess halls and play cards. While they played, they listened to the radio. The ranch was so far up in the hills that the ranch was so far up in the hills that the radio only got one station. At night, they listened to the station's best DJ, Petey, the Muskrat Coltrane, who spun old bluegrass records. Sometimes between records, the Muskrat told stories. Dennis and Mac thought he was hilarious. One night, though, the Muskrat radio show was very different. It couldn't have been more than 6 months ago, but to Dennis and Mac, thinking back on it now, felt like another lifetime. The Muskrat had been playing a cheery Bill Monroe song, Footprints in the Snow, when he cut out the record halfway through the chorus. The ranch hands stopped their game of gin rummy. They turned and looked at the radio. The Muskrat always played a record all the way through. What could be wrong? Folks, said the muskrat, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm going to ask you to stay very calm. The manager of my station just passed me a note. It seems that the local health authorities are asking us radio folks to tell you, our listeners, that, well, a disease is spreading. The ranch hands put down their cards. Dennis and Mac exchanged a glance. Now, the muskrat said, his rich voice sounding uncharacteristically shaky, they don't quite know what this disease is, but it's real bad. It's very contagious, and people who get it don't have a lot of luck recovering. Now, doctors are trying to figure out a cure, but there's been no luck yet. So in the meantime, we're asking that you stay in your homes as much as possible and avoid public places until the disease dies down. One of the big ranch hands, a big cocky boy named TJ, laughed. Like heck I'm not going into town, TJ chuckled. I got a date. The other hand stared at him. TJ stopped laughing. Please, folks, do what the doctors say, the muskrat pleaded. I'm sure it'll just be for a few days. He was quiet for a moment. Then the ranch hands heard the sound of a turntable needle hitting the record, and an old Earl Scruggs song came on. Sorry about the interruption, kids. That was the beginning of it. For the next few days, the ranch went about its business. The Griersons told the boys not to worry, that this would all be over soon. They had enough food on the ranch to last months. In the meantime, there were plenty of new calves that needed branding. At night, everyone gathered around the radio and listened to updates. The news seemed only to get worse. More and more people were getting sick. The symptoms were strange. People would become violently ill, then fall into a long, deep sleep. The big cities, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, had become like ghost towns. No one would go out into the street for fear of catching the disease. The news kept getting worse until finally the radio station stopped transmitting. The Griersons called a meeting in the dining room of the main house. Everyone sat around the big dining room table where Ann Grierson served Sunday supper. After everyone was seated, Bucky Grierson stood up. He was a short, plump man with a droopy handlebar mustache. You wouldn't think it looking at him, but his voice boomed. Now, he said, I know you're worried about your families, and I don't feel right chaining you here while you don't know what's become of your people. So anyone who wants to leave is free to go. Ann and I will make do. Dennis and Mac looked at each other. They talked about leaving, but had tried to pretend they wouldn't need to. They had hoped the plague would be over soon, that the world would return to the way it was, that it had all been a strange hallucination. Now that they had the option to venture out into the world to see how bad things really were, they weren't sure they wanted to know. By a show of hands, Bucky Grierson asked, how many of you want to leave? Mac and Dennis looked around. They were the only two with their hands up. The Griersons gave them enough food to last a couple of weeks. Cornbread and apples and cured ham and syrupy peaches in mason jars. Mac and Dennis picked up their things and loaded everything into Mac's truck, a sputtering old pickup. The Griersons and the ranch hands gathered around them to see them off. I'm going to hit pause here. In the second video, I will finish reading from this point out as well as the questions.